name is Dylan Hammock, and today I will be showing you how God shows all throughout the Pentateuch that He is a covenant maker. The way I'm going to do that is by doing a play. The four stories we're going to tell throughout this play are Noah, Abraham, Moses, and David. At the end, I will show you how all these stories correlate to further on into the Old Testament, and also how it correlates into the New Testament. Enjoy the show. In Genesis 5 through 9, in the time of Noah, everyone was sinning, and in the eyes of the Lord, He was not happy with them. So He decided to pick one chosen person, who would be Noah. Noah was a good person, so God chose him to build an ark for him because an incoming flood was going to take out all of humanity. So Noah obeyed. Noah built the ark, and the flood came. So him and his family got onto the ark. As the flood came, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, but Noah and his family stayed on the boat and survived. After the flood was over, he came onto land, and a rainbow came. God had told Noah that this was a sign of a covenant that He was making with Noah, and that He would never flood the earth again, and that this was the way that he would know that that was true. And that is the story of Noah and how he made a covenant with God.
Action.
The second story that we are going to be talking about is the story of Abram, otherwise known as Abraham. Abram had a wife named Sarah. Together they lived in another land, but God had called Abram to move. So he obeyed. However, they had many trials throughout the Bible of them not quite going to the land. At the end, they wind up going to the land that God had told them to, the land of Canaan. However, they could not have a son. So Abram pleaded with God to have a son. One night, God was sitting there talking to Abram and told him that Abraham would have many sons, so many that he would have as many as the stars and as many as the sand below him. So Abram, as long as Abram were to obey God and know Him as His one true God, Abram will be blessed with many sons to be many generations to come. And that is the covenant that Abraham and God made. This is one of the shorter ones, Mom. The next story that we are going to talk about is the story of Moses. When Moses was young, he was actually supposed to die. Pharaoh had ordered all of the Hebrew boys to be slaughtered and to kill. However, Moses was able to escape this because his mother put him in a river. So he wound up actually growing up as one of Pharaoh's princes. He then ran away and met God as a burning bush, and who told him that he should go and free the people of Israel. He went through a lot of things, but at the end, him and all the Israelites were able to escape from Egypt. Then one day, as they were out in the desert, all the Israelites and Moses was called up to a mountain. He went up to the top of the mountain and met with God. God told Moses that the Israelites were going to be His people and that they had to obey some specific rules. These rules were written down on tablets by God and given to Moses. The tablet was called the Ten Commandments. So Moses took the Ten Commandments and went to the Israelites and told them about what God had told them that they should obey so that they could be God's chosen people. He told them all the commandments so that they know what they should do. This was the covenant of Moses and how God made it with them.
And action.
The next story that we're going to talk about is the story of David. David was a shepherd boy who was born into a family of many brothers. However, his father didn't love him quite as much as the other brothers, and thus he made him the shepherd boy to guard over the sheep.
Bah.
As David was watching over the sheep, a man approached him named Elijah. Elijah told David that God had chose him to be the anointed one, and that he was going to anoint him to be the next king. David was shocked. How could this shepherd boy one day become the king? Elijah anointed David, telling him that he was God's chosen, and that as long as he lived for God, that he would one day become king. This is the story of how David was anointed and came under a covenant with God to one day later become king after Saul. All these covenants have been spoken about. We're all in the Pentateuch, and we're told and made by God. The reason why they are made is they were all leading up to the most important covenant, which is the new covenant. The new covenant was made by Jesus. Jesus was born in Bethlehem to a virgin named Mary and lived his life just as everyone else has. However, when he grew up, it was soon realized that he was actually the Messiah, come to save the world. He performed many miracles with his 12 apostles, and it seemed like he was going to overthrow the Roman government. Then Judah, one of his disciples, decided to sell out Jesus and sold him out for gold to Rome. Rome then took Jesus and crucified him on a cross. After Jesus died, he paid the price to make this covenant so that everyone could live a life of eternity because of his sacrifice. It was similar to in the Old Testament when they sacrificed lambs in order to atone for their sins. However, 3 days later, Jesus rose from the dead and came back to his disciples and told them to go out to the nations and make disciples. God made all of the Old Testament covenants so that when he could come to the time of Jesus, he was able to make the fulfillment and the new covenant that he really wanted to make for mankind, so that mankind and God could be one together. That is the covenant of Jesus and God. Cut out. Hi, this is Dylan Hammock. I'm so glad that you watched the play. I hope you really enjoyed it. Just wanted to go briefly over what we have learned today. So we started off with Noah, and we learned that Noah had his family and was living a really dysfunctional time, and God just wasn't happy with the people. So God chose Noah as a specific person to make a covenant with so that he would make this boat and his family would survive. The covenant that he wound up making at the end was that God would never flood the earth again. The way that he showed that was through the rainbow. The second person that we talked about was Abraham, who was very important. His original name was Abram, and him and Sarah were asked to move to a completely different place. They were obedient and they went ahead and did that, and because of that, God decided to make a covenant with them as well. And he told them that Abraham was going to have a son with Sarah, and that son would spread off to make many, many nations later on, and that his descendants would actually be as many as the stars. The next covenant that's made is Moses. We jump way forward into Exodus, and we talked about how Moses led his people out of Egypt and how they were in bondage of slavery before he was there. And then after that, he went up a hill and God made a covenant with the Israelites through Moses with the Ten Commandments. He told these Ten Commandments to the Israelites, allowing them to understand what they need to do in order to keep that covenant with God and be his chosen people. Later on, we find the kingdoms are destroyed, and we find that David is coming up, and he's coming up as king, and when they need a new king, and Elijah finds David and tells him that God has chosen you to be anointed to be the king one day. So Elijah anoints him in that moment, and all David has to do is live righteous and obey God, and one day he will be the king. That is his government. And then we show how all these covenants happen in the Old Testament, and what we learn from that is God this entire time has been trying to make a way for connection between us and God. And through that, he's been making these covenants so that at the end, Jesus could come onto the earth and he can make one final covenant through him. And we had discussed how Jesus lived his life, pureless, spotless lamb, and at the end he was crucified on the cross so that we could understand that God loves us and that we're washed clean from that. And that's the new covenant, that Jesus died on the cross and that we're pure and now that we're clean by the blood that he spilled for us. So as we've noticed, all these covenants were made, but the ultimate goal was actually for Jesus to come down and sacrifice his life for us. And I just hope you really enjoyed this play about covenant making, and I wish you farewell.